Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hi.
I started slow and then really ramped up.
I was just checking to make sure I had my phone turned off.
Yeah. So today is we've been bouncing around a little bit. I think we finished our metaverse big thing. So we're gonna move on. I want to talk a little bit about just like general brain science um, things.
Brain sciencey stuff
Yeah, we're doing some
today.
UX stuff, so it's time to do some
Okay.
brain science stuff.
Okay.
So I want to talk very briefly about this Nancy Canwisher.
Oh yeah, one of my
Yeah.
favorite researchers.
So tell me just like very briefly what you know about Nancy,
I wrote
and
about
if you don't know much, that's totally fine.
if I'd had some warning about this topic, I would have pulled out some information.
No, that's
But
fine.
I wrote in my book, I believe it's in my 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People book, both the first edition and the second edition. I wrote about some of Nancy Canwisher's research on, I'm sure she's done a lot of amazing research. I was just writing about one piece, which I think had to do with how people determine when they're looking at a picture or a photo or an avatar or something, how they determine whether is this thing human, is this thing not human, and that it's based on people are actually taking cues from the eyes. They're looking at the avatar or the robot or the human's eyes and deciding whether this thing is a human. It was just interesting research, but I'm sure
Yeah,
she
you don't
has.
need to summarize all of her research off the top of your. Yeah,
But I'm
tell me
sure she's
every research
done a
study she's ever
lot
done.
more than that. I'm sure she's
So
done a lot more than that. What caught your attention about her
So
work?
Nancy, she runs a lab at MIT, and the lab that she is involved with has, basically there's like thing in brain that was discovered. A lot of it runs through this lab, but especially even back in the when I'll tell you in a second. But she was talking about basically there was a grad student back when um, MRIs were first um,
For,
kind of hitting the mainstream.
are you talking
And
about functional
yes,
fMRIs?
fMRI. Yes, thank you. And she had a grad student who, you know, um, was wanted to, was trying to get apply and get jobs in the corporate world or whatever. And Nancy said, "Hey, look, yeah, you should really do a study with fMRI." And the guy was like, "This is just a flash in the pan. This thing is like it's so
Oh, no one's ever really going to use
it's
fMRI for this
gimmicky. It's like
research.
gimmicky." And she's like, "Look, just put it on your resume, right? If you do the dumbest study you can think of, just
Yeah,
put
and
it on
what's
your
it?
resume, and then you can walk around and be like, hey, I can do
I've
this,'
done
and you'll have it."
fMRI.
And
Yeah,
so the same with if you had like something about AI on your resume today, right? Like
yeah,
whether or not it's the future or not, it like looks good. People are interested in it.
yeah.
So he was like, "Fine, I'll do something really just silly, and we'll have people just look at pictures, and we'll just have them in the fMRI, and we'll
I
show
think I
that
know where this is headed. Yeah, go ahead.
nothing is going to happen."
Right.
And so they, goes in the fMRI, and of course, what they find is anytime they were showed a picture, there was this one spot in the brain that was always lighting up, and out of basically total happenstance, they discover the part of the brain that is responsible for detecting scenes. So whether are you in like the plains or a mountain, or because they were just showing pictures of scenes. That's what they were doing, and it was the same part of the brain. And of course, that once they realized that this was on the table, then they had for the next, I don't know, probably
Okay,
until the present,
okay.
a parade of
A
people
parade of
running
people
through the
running all
fMRI
these
where they show
and doing
pictures of,
all this research.
here's a picture
All
of a
right,
smile and a picture of a
all
horse
right.
and a picture of a, yeah.
Before we get back, all right. So now I want to take a tangent. You got me going. I want to take a small tangent about
Uh-huh.
because this is interesting. There's so many ways to do research, right? One way of doing research is we're interested in this topic. And we're going to do a series of studies and discover, what part of the brain deals with what kind of images. Which I'm sure this one piece of research ended up being a lot of other research studies around it. And that's one way to do research. And the other way to do research is like totally accidental stuff that happens. Like just run a study so you have fMRI on your resume. Or this made me think of another one. There's this, oh no, and I'm not going to remember the
It's
researcher's
okay.
name,
It's
but there's
just
this other researcher who was this was not humans at fMRI. This was rats. We do a lot of research on rats because actually biologically rats are a lot like humans. But they were doing they had electrodes hooked up to rats and
talking about me.
yeah, you're very rat like. They had electrodes hooked up and they were taking all these measurements. And one night um, they forgot to turn off the machine that was recording the rat brain activity.
Uh-huh.
So it ran all night while the rats were sleeping. And then they discovered about all this real what was going on during sleep, then how that was related to what had gone on during the activity of the day. And he made all these breakthroughs about the role of sleep and what's happening in the
That's
brain and
hilarious.
consolidation of memory. And it started this whole big line of research. And it was an accident that somebody didn't turn off the machine at night. So I think there's
That's great.
and I think any researcher, certainly I think any of the famous researchers will tell you that these accidental things happen, and they can take you into a wonderful line of research. So don't discount that if someone says, "Oh, why don't you do this?" Or if someone says, "Hey, a really weird thing happened last night when we forgot to turn the machine off." So anyway, that's that. All right, back to Canwisher. Back to Canwisher.
I only bring it up because in doing some identifying some materials for people in research, I came across, it's buried. It's like impossible to find.
What?
But there's this series of courses on YouTube,
Oh
which is
yeah,
the
yeah.
MIT CBMM, and it's like it's hard to find, but it's specifically the uh, Q1 2018,
Well, you know what we can
spring
do? Yeah, I have it.
2018,
I have the. You gave me the link, and I have it up on my computer. I will.
9.11.
We can put the link in our notes for this podcast episode.
Yeah, it's got like 4,000 views. I am a
Nobody's
huge
watching this.
I'm a huge fan of finding like
Random things.
really really great things on YouTube that
So
are
this is
amazing that no one.
Nancy Canwisher.
Yeah, it is basically she she's giving just like how the brain works according to Nancy, but it's edited in such a way that it's in like these amazing chunks. So it's like 9 minutes on the face system,
Okay, so do you feel? You told me about these, and I have not watched them yet. And I think,
or like
I
eight, like
how
eight.
much? All right, I'm gonna have to I'm gonna ask for some time off from all my project work so that I can sit around and watch these videos.
Well, they're not long. That's what I'm saying. It's like 26 minutes on how fMRI works,
Yeah.
and then 5 minutes on
How the
how
brain is processing visual images.
like the role of animals in neuroscience. And then so it's from a lecture, but instead of it being just like here's like an hour, it's
Hour
like you
long
the whole
lecture,
thing, which are fine. Like this is like really just amazing,
pulling out the amazing excerpts.
but it's like it's not heavily edited, so I don't know how this
And
thing
it's all
happened.
free. It's amazing. I'm gonna definitely check it out. We'll put the link in and let people
Uh, Recently,
check it out.
if anyone follows my LinkedIn or my socials, I recently found this amazing lecture about forests.
I know, you sent that to me, and
Yeah.
at first I was like, "Why is he
Yeah, it
sending
has like
me
it's like from like the
video?"
some Vermont county
Yeah,
workshop.
yeah, that's right. It starts off there's it's a remote meeting in
There's like
Vermont.
there's like 12 people on a
12
Zoom
people on the quarterly meeting for the Friends of the Forest or something, it's
for
like,
some
I mean, it's
Vermont thing.
something like that. And I started
It's got
watching it
it
and
has
I
like it
was
has like
like,
100 views.
why did he send me this? But it's really good.
It's so good.
And it's such a great example too, besides being interesting about force. And I'm very interested in all the new
What's a
work and
forest?
research on forest. Yeah, so it's about what's a forest. And at first I was like, why would I want to watch this? But it's really good, and it's a really good example. Here's what I think it's an excellent example of, even if you don't care about forests. Are we going to have to put this link in too?
I hope
Okay.
so, yeah.
All right, we'll
First
put
of all,
this link
who
in.
doesn't care about forests?
But even
Everyone
if you
loves
didn't,
forests.
it's a really good example of the power of a mental model
Yeah.
to grab attention and uh, to engage someone in material. It's just
Mhm.
because he starts right off with, it's like,
What's a
okay,
forest?
well, he
Because
says,
it's not
what's a
trees.
forest? It's not trees. And then you're like,
Because
what?
you know that, because there are like the tree farms that people
Yeah,
probably have driven by, and
but
that's
you
not a
still,
forest.
but it's still such an interesting question because
Yeah,
in
right.
right away you go, you know, I don't know what a forest
Let's
is.
let's
And
get
then
him
he
on the
just,
podcast.
okay,
You
okay.
have to write that down. That would be great. We get the
All
forest
right.
guy on the podcast.
I'm going to write that down. We could get Nancy Canwisher on the
I
podcast.
don't think we can.
But I know her because I've communicated with her about the research that I put in my book. And she responded back and gave us permission to use the photos and all of that. So I'm going to write this down. I'm going to write down "Get Forest Guy," and I'll also write down "Try and get Nancy Canwisher."
Hey,
We'll do
and I
both of
just want to
those.
add, we should reserve just a time at the end. We have a question that's a little unrelated, but we'll maybe at the end
Okay,
we'll
we'll
try to
save some time.
answer.
We'll save some time. Yeah, and in fact, I do want to say, if any of you guys that are listening or watching, whether live, real time, or later, if you have ideas of topics you would like us to cover, people you'd like us to bring on and have on
Oh,
the podcast,
well,
we're always open to that,
yeah, sure. We'll get
aren't we?
we'll get Joe Rogan and Elon Musk next.
No, we're not. No, I didn't say they had to be incredibly famous people.
Okay, let's get back to the forest.
Okay. I thought we were talking about Nancy
Okay,
Canwisher.
let's get back to Nancy Camwicher.
Okay, go ahead.
Um, so I just really wanted to sort of bring people's attention to this really really awesome series, and it's somehow amazingly complex. Like one of the problems I think that happens a lot in our field, in behavioral science field, that is that we are trying to explain to people really complex research, and I think we do a good job of not of for the most part. We could probably do better from time to time of not dumbing it down too much, and saying like, well, it's like this and do it all the time, and it's because X or Y. Like we do, I think we usually
Use
add the
blue.
caveat.
Just use blue.
Yeah, like
Or don't use blue.
yeah, red is for anger, or something simplistic, right? And the reality is how we perceive colors is really, really, really complicated.
Yeah.
She has in the course a picture that is a visual representation of all the parts of the visual system and how they connect with each other. And it's I'll wonder if I can find it, but um, it's basically like there's like 100 different boxes and there's all over the place. I mean, it's impossibly complex.
Right.
And just as an example, we'll stick with the vision system because it's easy to research because it's sort of towards
It's in the back.
in the back, and so you can kind of get close to it, and you can take good pictures of it, and it's just it's easy to tell what you're looking at if you're because you can display a picture and then not display a picture
Yeah.
versus like perception versus like touch or something
Yeah.
in some capacity or like emotional thinking or something.
Yeah.
Like you can't turn it on and off the way you can with like we showed a
Show a
picture,
picture, take the
take
picture
the picture
away.
away, show the yeah. um and so there is a part of the brain. So if you take a vertical light, okay, think of like uh, a straight stick of light,
Yes.
okay, and if you move it, right, there's a part of the brain that'll
Track the movement.
no, it won't track the moment. Well, that is processing,
Right.
okay.
Processing. Hmm.
But this part of the brain only goes if you're at like a straight angle.
That's
And
right.
if you go to 45,
Then that's a different
nothing.
part.
That's a different part of the
I
brain
know.
for seeing movement at a 45-degree angle
5-degree angle is
versus
different. Yeah. A
straight up and
vertical.
down.
Yep.
Like this is the kind of the systems and as she says problem solving that the brain has adapted to figure
Yeah.
out. But it is ridiculously complex.
It's very complex.
And
It's really
she
interesting.
yeah, so she is dumbing it down the best that she can, but not leaving anything out. And I
Yeah.
think that's
She
what's
does a
really
really
great
good job at that.
to be like to demonstrate how we're going through all the steps, and there are a lot of steps, but each step I'm going to try to make as simple as possible.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in our field in our industry, as it's become more popularized, and I will say that maybe the number of people in the industry is growing, and therefore the overall expertise of any one person is decreasing because there are maybe less experts, especially in a sort of academic, researchy step, and more generalists, which is not a bad thing. It just is. But I do think some of the amazing complexities of how complex these systems
Can
are
get lost.
can get lost. And much like the forest, we have most people walking around have no concept of what a forest is or like what's the most important thing in a forest, you know? Like what's the biggest indicator of whether a forest is healthy or not? And it turns out the answer to that is dead trees.
Dead trees.
That's the
Not the
not the
live
ones that are alive,
trees.
it's the dead ones that
Right.
actually are the biggest like the best indicator of how healthy a forest is. And it's so
Right.
counterintuitive, but it's because it's this complex system and you need the nutrients and there's the carbon sink and there's this whole thing and the life cycle of trees and certain
And
trees
it's
have to die so
interesting
other species
because
can
I
thrive.
think
And
a lot of things in the brain too, the way the brain works are counterintuitive. It's like you said with and if it's a 45-degree light changing, that's a different part of the brain. And it's like, what? Why would it be different? I think you're right. I think it is interesting about how much detail and it's not even detail, but how many specifics you need to know or should know about a body of knowledge in order to be able to use it and think about it and apply it. I don't know that there's a clear answer to that. I think there is a certain level beyond where if you don't know enough depth to that level, then you're not going to be able to use it. It might be interesting, but it won't necessarily be usable. But I think that's how.
You're parroting the information, but you're not understanding the
Well,
information.
and often, like you said, with there is definitely is a danger of generalizing, and you and I think we struggle. I don't know if that's the right word, but we deal with this a lot because we teach, right? We teach workshops, and
And
it's
in a room, you'll have software developers and people who went to art school.
and people who have studied neuroscience and as a master's, and people who, yeah, you have people who didn't take any of this in school. So you have this big wide variety of people in the room. You have one day to teach them stuff. You're not going to do a semester long neuroscience course, and yet there's interesting and important stuff from all those fields that you feel you want to impart. So how much detail do you go into? What do you do about the fact that that you're not telling them everything? How much should you overgeneralize? I think it's all really good questions,
And
and we deal with it all the time. And
we have our
all
own limitations of understanding. I mean, we are not neuroscientists. Our understanding of the human brain is probably a fraction of Nancy's.
that would definitely be true.
And Nancy's understanding is probably a fraction of some of her lab techs who are
I mean, and
working on a specific part of the
I
brain.
have a PhD in psychology, and I did neuroscience research for my PhD dissertation. And I'm going to say I am not an expert in this field, right? Because you can, even if you are an expert in something in the
Yeah.
field, it's a little something,
Yeah.
plus my work was a long time ago before fMRI was out. So, and I've tried to keep up, but how many things can you keep up with? So yeah, it's all, but it's still interesting, and I would still, even with the possibility of possible misunderstanding or overgeneralization, I still suggest that people learn about this stuff and read about it and watch the YouTube videos and come to our workshops, because I'm going to just say in general that the more you know about people and how they think and how their brains work, the better you will be able to, if you're doing design, if you're doing nudging, if you're doing any of the things that we work with our clients on, I think it's useful. The more you
I
know,
think
the
it's
better you are.
also useful to, this is just general advice. If you're looking to learn something, I think you should look for an expert level that is one step above where you are. So, um,
You mean don't go too far above,
don't
but
do right,
don't go
don't
right at
go
the same
right at the same
level?
level. So we are um, experts in certain capacities about behavioral science. So where I go to learn is I don't want to go to people who are summarizing stuff. I need to go for my own understanding
You're
to
going right
really
to the,
understand some of the nuances.
yeah,
I have to go straight to the source. So I learn almost all of my stuff directly from the people who did the actual
with the
research
research.
or
Yeah,
reading the literal research papers.
yeah.
And even if I'm reading something and I may not totally understand what's happening, I probably understand a lot of it. And just seeing the context of how of, like, what is the context in which this research is being
Yeah,
done?
really important.
What is right? Like, what did the study look like?
So
What was
can
the
I
other part of the
can I
study that
how much
wasn't statistically
yeah, and how
significant?
much can I generalize this or not?
Right. And what caveats did the
Yeah,
researchers say? Like, when that this is interesting, but we worry that in blah 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 environment that
it
these
won't
effects may
hold.
not hold true, but maybe they do. But that requires every research study in the conclusion is like further research in this
Is
topic
needed.
is needed. Yeah, you can put that everywhere.
All right.
So that's where I go. That's why I wanted to go to Nancy, who's an expert.
All right.
But
I
for
have a question.
someone less
Go ahead.
experienced,
Finish your thought.
for someone less experienced, you don't don't, I think reading academic research is great, but that may be overwhelming for some people.
Yes. All right. Here's another question I have for you.
Hmm. Yeah,
So you
shoot.
mentioned about the line, the 45-degree angle line versus the vertical. Can you? I'm putting you on the spot.
Mhm.
Can you tell me one other
I'm
thing
not
that
through
you
the
learned?
course yet, so
What? I know,
I'm not
but
through everything.
is there one other thing you would like to share that you learned? This, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
For about the brain,
Yeah,
just
that you
as a
thought was
general
interesting.
topic.
That you thought was interesting, that you learned from the Nancy Kenwisher
Ah,
videos.
there is there's a fun color thing you can do. Where she in her thing, I don't know if you've seen this. Have you seen the pictures of the cars?
I'm not sure. What are you talking about?
One of her research assistants, I don't know what research assistants, someone in her lab, a person who is not her, did this research. So it's not her research, but it's someone associated with it.
Yeah,
And there's a picture of four cars,
yeah,
and the cars are of different colors,
yeah,
but you can tell they're like it's like a filter, right? Think of like an
yeah,
Instagram filter, right?
yeah.
Where it's like, so like it looks pink, but you can tell that it's just a yellow car with a pink
With a
filter.
pink tint.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because the background is white,
is
but the background's pink, so you can
yeah,
infer the color of the car. And so you see all these pictures. I have the cars of different colors, and in fact, the cars are all the same color. They just look like they're different colors because we don't see color, we infer color based on the lambda of the light that gets
yes,
reflected off of
yes.
stuff.
Yeah, no, I haven't
That's a
seen
good
that.
one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I can't wait to watch these videos. I have seen other research like that. I use that um, when I'm teaching. I teach a course a semester at University of Wisconsin, and I for one of the courses I do some of these. I do demonstrations, and there's this great demonstration of that effect. There's like a checkerboard of grays, white, medium, light gray, medium gray, dark gray, and it's similar to that because you look at two squares on the checkerboard, and one is obviously a very light gray, and the other one is obviously a very dark gray. But then I take the checkerboard and I move it from its original spot to the other spot, and then you realize, wait a minute, that's the same color, but it really does not look. I mean, it looks wildly different, and I have the students in the class usually go, "What? Wait, what? Do that again." And then they don't believe me. They're like, "You're doing something. You've programmed it to change color as you move it." And it's like, no, no, it's not. And I have to show them how, it's really not. So yeah, I find that, that is so, I think these things that have to do with, it's so interesting, Guthrie, that it's going on in our own brain and we don't understand it. How could we be so wrong about what we think we're seeing? Like, it just is amazing, and even when you see, and even when you're told what it is, it still doesn't change the way you perceive it.
Right.
You
Yeah.
still perceive it that way. And
Uh,
I think, to me, that is very eye-opening because, well, don't get going. I'm not going to get going on the philosophy of perception and what is real, and but you could, right? Because we get to the point where everything we think is real, is not really real. Oh, you have for those of you who are not just listening but are watching this as a video, Guthrie just popped up an example.
Yes, this is Rosa Laffer Souza. Probably pronouncing that wrong, but that's the researcher in question.
So
So
you're
isn't that
saying,
fun?
so I'm looking at a picture of 4 cars,
Uh-huh.
and you can tell, again, like you said, it looks like it's just a filter thing. But one car is definitely green,
Yeah.
one is definitely blue,
Blue.
one is like pinkish purple, and the other is yellow. And these are very now, but you're saying they're not.
Uh,
That the
right.
cars are actually all the same color, and this is being inferred from the background colors. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly what I'm saying. I'll see if I can't if I have the
Yeah.
at one point
It switches. You see the switch. Well, okay. I wish I didn't have any work I had
oh
to do.
oh here you go. Here you go.
Yeah. All right. I'm
So do
ready.
you
I'm
see
watching.
how it's gray?
Yeah.
It's gray in all four corners. It's gray,
Yeah.
right?
It's great.
Gray.
Yeah.
And you can see the colors at the bottom.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
Well,
all the cars are gray.
I'm going to have to take off work this afternoon, Guthrie. So all the meetings we have scheduled, we just cancel them, and I'm going to be watching YouTube videos about the brain. Right?
Anyways, you did ask if there's another fun one. That's a fun one.
I like that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it just the the level of complexity and sophistication. And by the way, I looked up one of the papers of that person, and it's
Of which
way
person?
over my head.
You mean this particular study with the colors?
Yes, well,
Okay.
the researcher who did this study,
Yeah.
like one of her academic
Yeah.
study stuff. I mean, and she's doing neuroscience at MIT, so okay, but um, it just, I mean, way I can read the econ papers. I can get
You
through
can't
the
read the neuroscience
I could get
papers?
through the Kahneman and Tversky econ with the graphs and
Yeah. Well,
the
that is really interesting. I can't
algebra
get
and
through
stuff.
those. Okay. All your econ and behavioral
Well, yeah,
economics
it's a
research studies, because I've
master
looked through
econ
some of
classes.
them that you pointed out to me, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
But I can get through not all, but a lot of the neuroscience ones. Do you remember in our courses, I sometimes talk about the fact that uh, the triggering of the decision behavior and it being one neuron. I don't know if you remember, we talk about that. And that's based on some research by a neuroscientist named Shadlin, who I actually know. Okay. So this is one of these weird things. So, all right. So I, Guthrie, that on the side when I'm not doing all this stuff, I'd like to do stuff with jazz, right? I
Yes.
sing jazz, I compose jazz, I go to jazz camps, for adults. And a couple years ago, probably like 2013, I was out in the state of Washington in a really nice part called Port Townsend. You have to take a ferry to get there. And I was at a jazz camp. And while at the camp, um, we met a guy named Michael Shadlin. And he's a neuroscientist I'm not sure, I think he switched institutions, but he's in New York. And um, he talked about, some of his neuroscience research. And then I went back and read some of his research, and that was one of the studies I read. And it was not easy to make it through that research
So
paper.
so this is like from the paper.
But I can make it through. Which
This is
paper is
real.
this?
This is the that researcher.
Shadlin? How'd you
No,
get? No,
the
the can
Zoza.
from the one with the
Yeah,
colors.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I can
Relationship of
actually.
shape-based
Right.
regions to
So
color-based
it's
regions. I
not
mean, this
easy for
is.
me to make it through, but I can actually make it through some of the
I
neuroscience
mean, I'm sure
stuff.
the text helps to say what's what, but
Yes.
no, these are kind of like plots, and
Yes,
there's
Guthrie, explain
squiggles,
this.
and
Yes, go ahead,
there's
Guthrie. I'm
this
listening.
arrow is pointing down, and this arrow is pointing left, and there are different colors and a shape bias versus color bias.
I think it is sometimes useful to just look at these research papers here's something
I'm in,
partially.
I'm impressed with just the level of this is the level of quality of scans that people can
Oh,
get
it's
now
really
are
good now. It
really
didn't
getting
used to be that
wild.
good.
That's a lot of like gradation and stuff, and I mean this is
Can I kind of complain?
so this one has a human and a monkey.
Oh, well, that's good.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead and complain.
Yeah,
I think it's important that every now and then somebody actually
so that's true.
tries to read one of these research papers, because sometimes, I don't know, Guthrie, if this has happened to you or if you've been with me when somebody's asked this. Somebody will say, well, so is there a research about, and then they ask a very specific question that is nothing like what any of these people would research. Like, is there a research about
What
whether
happens in the brain when
when someone is at a website and they're showing a light blue versus a medium blue? And I'm like, no, there isn't. Nobody's gonna do. They just have this really specific question, which I understand why they have a specific question that they want answered. But it's like, that's not the kind of research that's normally being done, in at the MIT Neuroscience Research Lab. It's many layers abstracted from that,
well, just like the
unfortunately.
brain,
What do you mean?
well, the brain has many layers.
Yeah. Yeah. So any of these things that somebody might want an answer to, it's probably not even just
And
one
the
part of the brain.
interactions. So one of the ways that you can, she says in her course, one of the ways to think about what an area of a brain does is to look at inputs and outputs. And so it's like, okay, what's the data that this region is getting in, and then what's the data it's sending out? And a lot of times it doesn't make any sense, because like it's doing this processing that's completely legible, but then it sends it to a different part of the brain that adds something, and then it sends it back, and then it sends it to a different part that then kind of puts some of it together, and then it gets flipped all around and sent to a different part that then is like mushed with four other things and more. Like it doesn't, it's not a factory, it's not an assembly line. It's a lot more like maybe an example would be like food coloring in a jar of water. Like,
How is your brain like food coloring in a jar of water? And
well,
the
we
answer
think
is
we think of like, okay, we see there's a part of the brain that then puts that together, and then there's an output. And
yeah,
really, it's like there's a trigger, and all the parts are just sort of mushing and mixing in like this very complex
yes,
three-dimensional, very dense way,
yes,
and sort of swirling together. And that's like a better way to interpret how the brain thinks than sort
yes.
of a factory line or assembly or processor.
But
And that's
this
just like
is
a really wild mental model and way more
and
complex.
it's really important to understand that, I think. But it's also the reason why, you cannot say, "Oh yeah, uh, you know, we can put together machine learning and artificial intelligence just the way the human brain
Well, you could
works."
give it a decade, but
A decade, it'll take more than a decade. But a computer is not going to think like a
this
human
has been
does
one of the big developments has been to write software that has the ability to be
to do that.
multi-channel on a huge system. I mean, we talked to someone, you know, that when it comes to that kind of stuff, humans are going to be best at things that we can do in like less than half a second, right? That's sort of where we're at right now. The things where there's not much processing involved, where there's not a whole lot of interactions.
Those are the things that the machines can do.
Is a line moving back and forth this way,
Yeah,
right? And that's like all it's doing, which is very different than follow a soccer ball as it flies through the
right,
air, right?
right.
Which is like all these complex things. But like we're just if we're taking like the simplest, basic thing, that's kind of where we are. But as you can build it up, I think
But
eventually you can make software.
I'm gonna say, you
It's
may
gonna be a while.
disagree,
It's
and
gonna
I
be
may
a
be
while.
wrong. I'm gonna say that even when we create, let's just say, artificial brains or whatever you want to call it, even when we make progress in that, it's not going to work the same way the human brain does, because I don't think you can separate the emotional aspects, the physical, um, tactile aspects, because our brains are working in this complex way that you mentioned, right? And it's doing that because of, you know a lot of years of evolution going through all of the animal kingdoms, and it includes these things like emotions and feelings. You can't
It's
separate that
it's
out.
it's there's like 7 dimensions that it's
I
working
don't
on.
think them. I don't think the artificial brains will replicate that.
I think I
They'll
think you could
go
do it in software.
in what?
I think you could do it in software, but I'm more optimistic.
Ooh, I
But
don't think you
so,
can do
so
it
the
in
problem
software.
is that you're right. When the brain is thinking, it's thinking. There's like 7 dimensions to the brain thinking. The first is the physical connections, right? Where there's all these different systems and they're all connected in these really really complex ways. Okay, like like I said, like a drop of ink in a pool of water. Okay, so that's the first thing. But then there's also the physical differences of the way those things are moving. So there are different types of neurons and the way those neurons are connected.
And
Okay,
there's
so that's a
chemical
second
and there's
dimension. Well, hold
electrical
on.
and
And then there's the chemical portion, right? So
yes,
depending on the state of the chemicals in your brain, that
right.
will change the processing. Are are you keto and and have a brain fog because you don't have any glucose in your brain? Have you just taken a bunch of mushrooms and your brain releases all the serotonin? Like what are the levels of things in the brain and that impacts it? So that's a dimension. Um, then there's probably the electrical stuff and there's probably a couple other dimensions I don't even know about. Um, so yeah, it's like it's the way it's working. It's not just, oh well, we have software that mimics the patterns. You'd have to add these other dimensions of things that respond to the environment, and that's also a function of how
Yeah,
things put together. So it's like,
yeah.
yeah, so it's like it's complicated. Okay, I get that it's complicated.
Is it complicated, Guthrie?
It's complicated.
All
Okay,
right.
should you want to answer a question and then we'll get out of here?
Yes, go ahead. What's the question? Someone wrote in a question.
Yeah, someone wrote in a question.
All right, what did they write?
Totally unrelated. So
Unrelated.
we'll just move on.
Okay. Here's the question. You want to read it out loud?
So with too much data overload, how do you trust data? And this is this is I think this gets back to this touches on a couple of different aspects, if I understand this question correctly. So, for example, uh, if you have too many, choices, you can get overwhelmed. And what really helps to trust is to like have very limited sort of choices. So imagine this. Um, imagine, let's take your credit score. Okay, you get an alert that says you look at a dashboard and it says your credit score has gone up 3 points. I have confidence that my credit score has gone up 3 points. Imagine you get a dashboard that shows every factor of your score. And some of it has gone up, and some of it has gone down, and some of it has stayed the same, and some of it is sideways. And it's like, there are all these complicated factors that I'm looking at. And it's like too much for me to draw conclusions. I think that's what's being asked.
Okay. So one thing would be if there's less data, it might engender more trust. But I'm going to also I'm going to question that because I think
There might be a cultural component to this as
I
well.
think trust is complicated. Okay. And I think it has to do with I do think if there's too many choices or too much information, that can overload people, but not always. Sometimes if there's a lot of data, then I trust what the data is because there's all this data. They must really know what they're doing. They did all this work. They gave me all this data. So I think it depends so much on the context. I think it depends on I think it's a lot like decision making. I think when you're deciding to trust something, that is a decision. And the research we know about decisions tells us things like confidence is really important. So, how confident am I in this data? How confident am I in the source of the data? And that might mitigate how much data there is. If I'm really confident, I might not need to see a lot. If I'm really confident, and you show me a lot, it doesn't overload me because I think, oh, yeah, see, these people always give lots of data. So I think whether we trust or not is a decision to trust. And I think it's part of the whole decision thing. So it depends on our emotions. I think it depends a lot on cognitive biases. So if I have a confirmation bias in which this data that I'm looking at, whether it's a lot or not, is in line with things I already believe, then I'm going to trust it more, whether it's a lot of data or a small amount of data. So I think it's complicated. And but I think you could definitely put some guidelines around it. So, in the sense of if you think people initially don't have a lot of trust, then you should do X, Y, or Z. But I don't know if you can. I really don't know if you can make a blanket statement. I don't think, Guthrie, what is your opinion? I don't think you can say, oh, if you want people to trust the data, then show a little bit. I think it depends. Or if you want people to trust the data, show a lot.
I mean, there's progressive disclosure.
I was going to say progressive disclosure would probably help, meaning show a little bit, but then it's obvious I can dig for more. So if I don't trust yet, I can dig for more, and maybe that will help me trust more, but that might actually make me trust less if I dig for more.
And I know I've seen research about cultural differences where people from some cultures just prefer all the data just to be shown because if they feel like you're hiding things,
then they won't trust you.
So it's complicated.
Yeah. So I don't think we can. Unfortunately, we don't have an answer.
No, it's too complicated. Context dependent. All right. You can email us questions at info@theteenw.com.
We'll put in links to the forest and the Nancy Canwisher.
Yep, and we continue to send our thoughts to some of the geopolitical stuff that's happening around the world, and that's always a burden. But hopefully, this was a fun distraction for everyone out there. And is there anything else we really should be talking about?
Not that I can think of.
Nah, it's the same old stuff. You can check out our new website, theteamdev.com, store.theteamdev.com, courses.theteamdev.com. We got stuff all over the place. So if you have any
Thanks,
questions, just let us know.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening
Bye.
and watching. Bye.